Anyone, the Apostle Paul said, born into this world would be born or has been born or will be born through Adam. And so whatever is true of Adam, the Apostle Paul said, is also true of us, which means that when sin contaminated Adam, sin contaminated us. It wasn't fair, but it was true. Right? And just because something isn't fair doesn't mean that it's not true. Sin contaminated us, meaning that when we were born into this world, you and me and all of us, we were born with the guilt of sin. I was born with the condemnation of sin. I was born with this feeling, right? This feeling of sin kind of ruling over me or having power or having control over me. And see, the Apostle Paul would say, okay, the reason why, right? The reason why you keep doing, the reason why I keep doing all these things that I do not want to do, the reason why there's this battle inside of you, he would say, is because sin rules over you. Sin is your master, the Apostle Paul would say. In fact, this is how the Apostle Paul, how he kind of summarizes. He summarizes his own personal experience dealing with this. He says this, he says, "What a wretched man that I am." Now, you felt that at some point in your life, haven't you? See, we do not know what it is the Apostle Paul is referring to here, but what we know is that it wasn't small, that this was something that he struggled with. This was something where he started to wonder, okay, why am I not doing the things I ought to do? And it made him feel wretched. Wretched, what is wrong with me? What has gotten into me? I would give anything to deal with this incessant insecurity that always drives me to go places and to do things I know I'm going to regret. I always regret. I would do anything to not blow up at my wife, to not blow up at my kids, to not blow up at my husband. What is wrong with me? What has gotten into me? And so in Romans chapter 6, the Apostle Paul, he begins to give us the solution to this problem. And he's going to tell us a little heads up. The solution is not willpower, it's not self-discipline, it's not more self-control. Even though, interestingly enough, the Apostle Paul would actually encourage all of those things throughout the New Testament. But he says that those are not, in fact, the solution. He would go on to tell us, actually, those are a result of the solution. They're what he would call the fruit of the Spirit a little bit later on. He would say that they actually come as a result of having the solution. The solution, he would say, is way bigger, way more significant. It's way more important than just self-control or discipline or willpower. In fact, one of the results of having the solution is you'll have the ability to have self-control in areas that previously you had no control. And that's where he begins today in Romans chapter 6, and he tells us this in verse 3. He says, "Don't you know that all of us who are baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death?" Don't you know that? Paul would say, to which we hear this and we think, okay, not only did I not know that, now that you've told me that, I still don't know. I still don't know what is he even talking about, right? This is so important. Because if you've kind of grown up in church or around church or even just familiar with church, as soon as we hear this word baptized, right, we immediately think religious. We immediately think like water or sprinkle or dunk. Right? When the Apostle Paul wrote this, this Greek word here, baptizo, right? Baptizo is a very common non-religious word, which just literally means to dip. That's all it means, to dip, as in to place one thing into another thing. And so this is what the Apostle Paul is saying, right? This is so important. He's saying that when you were in Adam, because you're in Adam, what was true of Adam is also true of you, right? And so, don't you know, right? Don't you know that you were in Adam? What was true of Adam was true of you. You were separated from God. You were born under the power of sin, under the dictate of sin. But don't you know, right? Don't you know that when you were baptized, right, you were actually baptized into his death? Right? Don't you know that, Paul would say? When you were baptized, God placed you. You were actually baptized into the death of Jesus. And just as what was true of Adam was true of you, this is now true of you because you are now in Jesus. You were baptized into his death. Paul says the death of Jesus and all that went along with it, which he's about to tell us in just a moment, and the resurrection of Jesus and all that went along with it, Paul would say, all of those things are now true of you because you are now in Jesus. He goes on and he says this, for we know that our old self, that's the old part of us that was in Adam, our old self was crucified with Jesus, right? Once you're placed into Jesus, what is true of Jesus is now true of you. The reason you get to go to heaven one day is because you're connected to Jesus. The reason you can live a new life now, the Apostle Paul would say, is the very same reason. It's because you are in Jesus, right? For we know that our old self was crucified with Jesus so that the body ruled by sin, right? That's the old part of us. The body ruled by sin might be done away with, which means the part of you that was ruled by sin is no longer under the power. It's no longer under the entity. It's no longer under the control of this entity called sin. For we know, he says, that our old self was crucified with Jesus so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves. A more accurate translation of this word here is actually to be made powerless. To be made powerless, that we should no longer be made powerless to sin. When you were taken out of Adam, Paul says, you are no longer powerless to sin. You were taken out of Adam and you were placed into Jesus. That sin, Paul says, lost its claim. It lost its ownership to you. This is kind of like what happens during an international adoption. Think about this, right? There's this baby, right? There's this toddler, there's this child, this teenager that's living somewhere in another country, living in an orphanage, right? And they're living under, this is key, several layers of authority, right? There's a government, there's a state, there's an institution, there's an orphanage, there's a director of an orphanage, there's staff at the orphanage, and every aspect of this child's life is dictated by all of these authorities. When they get up, when they go to bed, what they eat each day, if they go to school, when they go to school, how much school they get to go to, what they're going to do after school, who they're going to play with, who they're going to live with. Every single aspect of that child's life is dictated by all of these authorities. And then think about this, right? I mean, you got to picture this. And this is, for those of you who have done this, I can only imagine. This is so amazing. It's so powerful to think of, right? And if you've been involved with this, with supporting a family, then you know this, right? With a signature, right? With a signature. Now, again, for those of you who have done this, I get it. It's more like, many, many, many countless signatures. I get it, right? But with ink on a piece of paper, with a signature, that child goes from orphan to family member, from one name to a brand new name. There are so many ramifications of this, right? So many ramifications of this. And again, you know this, right? You know this. The older the child is, right? The longer, the more difficult this process is for that child, for that family, for them to get used to this new world, for them to get used to this new life, for them to get used to this brand new identity, for them to get used to this brand new love. And oftentimes, right, you've heard stories. There's so many battles along the way. The truth is, many times there's huge guilt along the way. Right? In fact, you know stories. You've heard stories about children who actually hoard food in their bedrooms because they grew up in an environment where there just was not enough food in an orphanage. And the parents who have actually navigated this whole incredible process, right? They'll tell you this, and these are my words, not theirs. They had to learn to accommodate themselves. They had to learn how to adjust themselves to help their new son, to help their new daughter understand and live in the reality that I am not who I used to be because everything is just different. It's just different now. And perhaps most important as it relates to international adoption and what the Apostle Paul is saying to us today, right? Here's the part that I just don't want you to miss this morning. With a signature, right? With a signature, that government, that state, that institution, that orphanage, that director of the orphanage, the staff at the orphanage, as wonderful as all of those people may be, with a signature, they all lose authority over that child. And they can call, and they can text, and they can write a letter. They can even show up at the door. And mom or dad shows up at the door and says, no. You have no authority over this child anymore because she belongs to me. Now here's what the Apostle Paul is saying. Whether you understood it or not, whether you recognized it or not, whether anybody ever told you or not, when you were taken out of Adam and you were placed into Jesus, you got a new name. You got a new family. You got a brand new identity. And maybe most significant to your experience, right, your life on earth, maybe most significantly when it comes to what it is that you experience day by day. Because see, you may have spent your entire life, ever since you become a follower of Jesus, you may have spent your entire life saying yes to sin. Right? Your entire life, your whole life experience may be just about you saying yes to sin, yes to temptation, because it just kind of overwhelms you and it wells up inside of you, and the feelings are sometimes so strong. And you find yourself in the midst of this battle of I don't want to, but I do want to, and I don't want to, but I kind of really do want to. We're going to talk about that more next week. But see, listen, here's what you need to know from this point forward and for the rest of your life. If you are in Jesus, sin is not your master, because with the signature, with the piercing of a nail, with the blow of a hammer, sin lost all authority over you, and sin is not your master anymore. And sin, you can call and you can text and you can show up at my door. I just want you to know that I am in Christ, and when he died for me, and when he died to the power of sin, I died to the power of sin. And so sin, you are not my master anymore. In those moments of temptation, in those moments of feeling overwhelmed emotionally, overwhelmed with despair, overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with fear, overwhelmed with loneliness, overwhelmed with lust, overwhelmed with guilt, whatever it is, whenever you are feeling that emotion, that overwhelming emotion, it just kind of comes over you and you are on your way to that place that you go. Every time you're feeling overwhelmed emotionally, you can go ahead and go there. That's fine. I just want you to pause on your way and remind yourself, and I want you to actually say this out loud to yourself: sin is not my master anymore. Because when this becomes your way of approaching life, change happens. Change happens. You are not the person, the Apostle Paul would say, that you used to be, so there is no point in living the way you used to live, because sin is not your master anymore. Jesus said it like this: I didn't come into this world to condemn the world. I came into this world to save the world through myself. I came into this world so that you would no longer be under the authority of sin, that sin is not your master anymore.